Hey everybody, it's Joe Jonas hanging with Jag.
Hi, this is Carly Rae Jepsen, and you're listening to Jag.
Ryan Seacrest with Jag.
It's B.O.B. So much swag with my homie Jag.
And now, a look at this week in podcasting news. It's the Jag Show podcast.
Welcome in, I am John Jag Gay. My advice to you this week is that if you want your podcast to grow, it is not about you. Many people start a podcast because they feel it's the in thing to do, or my friends say I'm funny, or a myriad of other reasons. But if you really want people to listen to your podcast, if you want to grow your audience, if you even want to monetize your show, it has to be about your listeners. What is a listener getting out of your show? Are they informed, entertained, educated, or do they get an escape? Have you been able to connect with them on an emotional level? People aren't going to listen to your podcast just because they liked you and you asked them to. Too much other content exists to compete for their attention. You've got to stand out from that crowd. Incidentally, that's a lesson that baby radio DJs have to learn. When we first crack the mic, the world is our oyster. But to succeed as an entertainer, you have to make the content about the listener, not yourself. By the way, memo to college senior Jag. No pop radio listeners in Syracuse, New York care about the fact the Patriots just won their first Super Bowl. So you get the idea. Other podcasting news this week, Seth Rogen is developing a podcast for SiriusXM and Stitcher, and Spotify is going to be the exclusive home for Michigan native Dax Shepard's Armchair Expert podcast. They'll still be free, but only available on Spotify as of June 1st. Speaking of Spotify, they're soon going to roll out high-fidelity audio for music and podcasts, and also transcription for podcasts. And combining both sides of their business, they've now figured out a way to let podcasters use full songs, not just clips, in their podcasts. Now, of course, this has to do with their music licensing deals. Sounds great, right? Well, hang on a second. This is going to work for you on Spotify, but you still can't legally publish that same show on Apple and other platforms. And that's important, because Apple and Spotify are still the two biggest platforms out there. Who's got a bigger slice of the pie? Well, it depends on who you ask. Podcast host Libsyn has Apple way ahead, but podcast host Buzzsprout has Spotify in a dead heat with them. Now, there's a lot of technical back-end reasons for the discrepancy, and James Cridland, as always, breaks this down brilliantly in Pod News. If you want to read the article and the explanation, you can check out the link in today's show notes. But the key takeaway is this. Be everywhere you can be. At the very least, make sure your podcast is on Apple, Spotify, and Google. And you can consider other destinations too, like Stitcher, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Amazon, Pandora, the list goes on. It doesn't cost you a dime to be on any of these platforms, so you may as well do it and expose your podcast to as many listeners as possible. Now, podcast advertising grew about 19% in 2020, according to the Interactive Advertising Bureau, and listeners don't mind commercials. In fact, they're more effective in the podcast medium than in other media, according to a study from Cumulus Media and Signal Hill Insights, as reported by Pod News and linked in today's show notes. Podcast Movement is the first week in August in Nashville. I'm planning on attending in person. They've announced their first group of speakers, and they also have a scholarship available for students. That is worth checking out. It's an expensive ticket, but it is worth it. It is the biggest podcasting convention I've ever gone to. I'm looking forward to going to my first in-person podcasting event in 2 years. I'm not a paid endorser of Podcast Movement, but I've gotten a ton out of it in the time that I've gone. If you're coming to Podcast Movement, hit me up. I'd love to see you and meet you in person in Nashville. And a correction to a post of mine on social media before I go. Thank you to Steve Stewart and the Podcast Editors Club for my new Podcast Editing Ninja t-shirt. Unfortunately, it's black, and I have a black background in the video, and I just wouldn't want to just be a floating head in the video. It's not why I'm wearing it now, but thank you, Steve, for connecting me with resources for the t-shirt. Not compensated. I did pay for it. As always, stay healthy and stay safe, and I will talk to you next week. Later!
If you like what you just heard, share The Jag Show with someone else who's interested in podcasts. You can also follow The Jag Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit jagindetroit.com.